welcome Mark Heaps, who has graciously agreed to present for us tonight on Photoshop and Illustrator and CreativeCloud. And he is a fantastic speaker for many different places. He's spoken for at Adobe Max, at Creative Pro. He is a pro, and hope you all enjoy the meeting. So thank you, Mark.
Yeah, no worries. And Melissa dropped that bomb on me earlier that it was the last one. And I was like, what? Oh my gosh. Like, it's crazy, because I think one of the first user groups I spoke with outside of the one that used to be in San Jose when I lived there, I think was y'all's group. So this is kind of bringing it around full circle. But you know, none of these things end. You'll have somebody else that will pick one up and run with it from there. So yeah, thank you for having me. Glad to see, you know, so many people joining to hang out this evening. I wanted to treat this one tonight a little less formally. Normally I put slides together and I do a whole spiel, but I just wanted to kind of do this overview of just techniques that my team and I have been playing with. Why are we playing with them a certain way? I've been working for my wife I was working for my wife for 5.5 years. And then not quite a year ago, one of our clients actually recruited me. And I've joined an AI accelerator company. I'm working in artificial intelligence, and it's a completely new world for me. Rather than just being a graphic geek, getting to really go deep into how do neural networks work and machine learning and understanding how to train robots in the ethereal sense. So it's a pretty wacky change. So I thought tonight I just could talk about some of the techniques, some of the features in Photoshop and Illustrator that we're using and why we're using them the way we are as collaborators. So let me, we'll keep this fairly loose, and I've got the chat over here, but I'm always open to questions. And so feel free to ask in the chat. And if I miss it, Myra or Melissa, feel free to unmute and be like, hey, Mark, we got an important question. So let me see if I can hit the share screen button here. All right, one of 3 desktops. Let's pick this one. All right. This is where Zoom starts hiding things automatically. It's always a little confusing. All right, let's see here. So can everybody see the picture of the adorable, cute puppies?
Yep.
And yes, you can always put thumbs up on cam. All right, so you know, this one, I just want to kind of start with, and most of you probably know, you're all Adobe enthusiasts, right? One of the things that that has really revolutionized sort of workflow for me is actually tethered to artificial intelligence, right? Which is what Adobe calls Adobe Sensei. And there's a lot of technology around training these workloads, these models is what they call them, into how do you recognize things, right? And so this actually starts at a very granular level. You actually have to have people that say, this is a dog, this is a dog, this is a dog. And eventually there's enough data in those confirmed points that the system will say, is this a dog? And you say, yes, that is, good job. And it eventually trains it up and trains it up. And when it gets enough information, that data literally gets stored. A lot of people think this happens via the cloud. It doesn't. It gets stored into the program, the compiler, et cetera. So every time we're adding these data sets into programs like Photoshop, Illustrator, CreativeCloud, and that, we continue to advance what the machine learning can do. So this is an example of this. I'm going to dive through a few different ones here. Just to show some features that I'm not sure everybody's using. So here's a good example of one, right? If we went into the feature that Adobe marketed and promoted, you know, we would probably go in here and say, oh, I want to do select subject. And we could choose this and, you know, let it take a kind of a best guess here. And it does a pretty good job. I don't know if everybody can see that on the stream, but it's pretty good at trying to figure out that there's a pillar here. And considering the fact that all of this is in the same color spectrum, similar hues, that's pretty darn clever in the way that it figured out. One of the ones that you can use though is focus area. And what each of these do when you think about select subject is looking at, is there an object there that I've been trained to recognize? Is it a dog? Is it a tree? You know, what is it? When you take focus area, what it's actually doing is not only applying the object recognition, but it's also looking for contiguous lines, contrasting edges, and how many pixels do they span with a blur or not. And so sort of intelligently uses that to decipher is something in or out of focus. I pray for the day that it'll actually understand metadata from a camera and know that your focal point was here, and it can actually expand out from there. It's not doing that yet. Lightroom is kind of playing with that, but using this focus area, you get this interesting preview kind of dialog box here. You can see that it's thinking, and there it actually got more of the pillar than the object detection did. So, with this focal area element, I can make some adjustments. I can add areas if I need to. And then intelligently it says, what do you want to output to? Do you want to output to a layer mask? Do you want to go to a selection? So on and so forth. So this is really handy, just being able to kind of get into some quick selections. Where we get into more control is, let's go back to that picture with the dogs, is where we can really use this new object selection tool. And for those of you that aren't using it a lot, the default on this is to actually use a rectangle. It's a rectangular marquee, and you can go in here and frame around things. But I actually greatly prefer using the lasso. You don't have to be super exact with it, but the reality is that any area I can shave off pixels it doesn't need to look at, the more likely it is to give me a better selection. So we'll kind of start here as far as workflow goes, right? So if I had to do some kind of interesting text treatment, maybe this is going in a video, maybe it's going in some sort of banner graphic or Google ad, right? All I have to do is marquee loosely around this, come in here, go around the ear, go up. And very quickly there, it's snapping to what it thinks is the dog. Now I can go in here and hold shift just like a traditional selection tool, go around this bottom leg, say, hey, you forgot a piece. It says, okay, I thought I lost a piece. It adds that very, very quickly. Interestingly, there are some settings up here like object subtract, which I don't know if everybody can see that, but these are those little settings that everybody tends to ignore. This object subtract, when you have that activated, you're teaching it that there might be holes in the area or the object that you're asking it to identify and select. So because I went into the shepherd over here, it knew that there was a hole. And it does this really by identifying what are the surrounding color values in the background and recognize that as separate. So if it's a hole, I should see these color frequencies around in gaps. So it's doing a pretty smart job here. And you can try to zoom in. See, this is a really grainy photo, super high ISO, but you could try to go in here and say, look, this is not supposed to be selected. Let's kind of get rid of that part. And just holding Option, it evaluated that and said, yep, that's more like the whole. Okay, let's snap out of there. Now, you could get into being finite with the fur, all these other details, but what I want to do is just show when I have to work quickly, how good a job that does. So maybe I want to do some sort of type treatment or things in here. One of the things that I'm trying to promote a lot with teams that are working, let's snap up a copy of our dog here. So Command J, knock it out there, put it on its own layer. If I wanted to add some type, I certainly could do that here in Photoshop, but I work collaboratively with a lot of people on my team or contractors, vendors, et cetera. So one of the things that we're really getting into is Myra alluded to in the topic, is using CreativeCloud, using libraries so that we can collaborate with one another. So this is going to be a running theme for tonight as we drill this home. So here's an example of just having a piece of type that rather than doing it in Photoshop, I might start over here in Illustrator. And this means that I can have something that's very basic type, put this into my library file. So for those of you that maybe aren't familiar, I'm assuming most people are, but libraries, since Adobe has added it with CreativeCloud, is sort of this pipe, and they don't want us thinking of it as a repository. They do not like when we talk about it as a Dropbox or Google Drive type of service. It's really supposed to be seen as kind of a pipe between these programs. It's why they don't let us have folder directories historically. They finally kind of folded on that one and let us start organizing our files because we wanted it to work like Dropbox. But what this allows us to do is I can take this type file, go down here to the plus symbol, and say, I'd like to add this graphic. Right now, I could add it as text. I can add, multiple parameters here as properties, but I'm just going to add it as a graphic. And you can see that gets added up here. Well, the moment I go back over to Photoshop, I go look at my libraries, there's that artwork one, and it shows me that it's an AI file. So this is sort of our entry point into playing this way, which means I can bring this type in, I can lay things out, I can organize it behind the one that we've knocked out here. Pretty good in that knockout. Could go back and adjust if we need to, but the point being here that I'm working with something that is now living in that pipe, which means as you have a library, right? Oops, let's see if I can nudge that over. I can add team members in here. I can add collaborators. So, if you're a photographer, this is a great way for you to put your files up in the cloud, and someone can actually be using that same library. And if it's a retoucher you're working with or a print shop, they can go in and make adjustments to the working file, and you can see that in your shared library. You can open it in Photoshop, etc. So as a collaboration tool, this is really, really cool. What it also means, though, is that if I was to double click on this artwork, right, it's now going to take me back to Illustrator, just like if you had a smart object, and open that object as its own file, which means I can format it. I could, change the text in here if I wanted to. So let's change that real quick. I'll just use my name for right now. All right, zoom down a little bit here. And maybe I want to borrow some styles that I've made from previous projects. So, I've got 2 styles here. I'll copy those. This gets into another area of workflow, which is you'll see I have these swatches, and I think I've demoed these before, maybe with this group in the past. I've certainly shown this at Adobe Max and also at Creative Pro. But what I've got here is just some basic objects. These are just squares, but have a lot of graphic formatting on them. And for those of you familiar with the appearance panel, you can see that I've got a ton of different strokes on this object. I've got, a 2-point stroke, 1.5 stroke, different weights, different colors. I've got 3 different fills on here. I've got effects added, all kinds of stuff going on. But what this means is I can very simply take my text and use the eyedropper tool. If I double click on the eyedropper tool, one of the things that you can get into is the ability to pick up styles. So the eyedropper will apply the appearance properties to whatever you have selected when you sample. So making sure that that's checked. So now I click on this, it immediately applies that style to my typography. So I keep a lot of these sort of graphics available for my team so that they can share these appearance properties with one another. So I'm going to take that one here. I'm actually going to turn off the shadow. I don't like that. And it's as easy as that. Just turn the eyeball off. And if I save this now, when I go back over to my Photoshop file, it automatically updates that here. So whereas we're all familiar with linking and linking in our graphic programs, usually linking within your directory. If we're web people, we're linking into whatever our host is in our ISP. But this pipe is just kind of a different way of working around that, where we're not really linking to a local file. We're not really linking to a website. It just kind of lives there directly for us. So I like this from a workflow standpoint. All right, I'll pause there for a second because that was a lot of banter. I'll do the check-in with Myra. And anybody pop up with anything while I was going?
Just love for the libraries.
Okay, cool. Well, we're going to do a lot of that tonight, so I'm glad to hear there's a lot of love around that. So let's keep going with some of these features that I've been playing with. One of the other new-ish features that I've been playing with a lot is, let's see if this is the right file. Well, this is an example of it. I'll be showing this at Adobe Max. At Max, I'm going to show how I break down all of these treatments, this illustration style, etc. But the thing that I wanted to show tonight, let's get rid of the dogs for a second. Bye, dogs. Okay, is in this file, right? So if I wanted to integrate kind of an interesting background in here, and I wanted it to be, this is going to sound contradictory, random and a pattern at the same time. Now, patterns are not new for those of you that have been doing this for a long time, and I think that's many of us. We all remember the painstaking days of drawing something we wanted to make a pattern and then cutting it into 4 parts and moving it into a perfectly squared canvas in Photoshop, offsetting it, defining that as a pattern. It was a nightmare. They've gotten a lot better about that. But one of the things that's interesting to me is the features they added for pattern fills and the ways that you can play with that. So let's talk about that a little bit now. So we'll finish this illustration off here in just a second. Let me get rid of that type layer. But maybe I want to do something where I'm adding maybe a floral pattern in the background, or maybe it's some typography, anything to that nature. So I think I have a file in here called leaves. Let's go to leaves. All right, and so I want to grab one of these for my background, and I'm just going to grab that object selection tool again. Don't need to be too careful about this. All right, so that snaps to that. I'm going to put that on its own layer real quick, hide the other layer. We'll do a quick marquee around it. And the reason you have to do a marquee for this, I hope one day Adobe fixes this, but the marquee defines the tile, the starting point for the pattern. With some of the more abstract pattern features available in Photoshop now, I hope one day they allow us to have contour selections so that I don't have to knock it out to a new layer with transparency. But for now, this is what we have to do. So I'm going to go in here and go to Edit and come down to where it says Define Pattern. And we'll give this a name. I'll call it Leaf 2. Because I think I have one in there already. And we'll deselect that. So that's now in Photoshop, right? It's not tethered to this file at all. So if we go back over here, one of the things that's been really interesting is these scripts that have been getting added. And I've been playing with these a lot. And so I'm going to go down to my layers. I'm going to go above this background layer. Make a new layer real quick, Command-Shift-Option-N for the quick key geeks in the room. And I'm just going to go to Edit, come down to Fill. And we've probably seen this before, but traditionally, right, this defaults to foreground color, background color, etc. Come down here to Pattern. And what's interesting is now they've got these options that have been added in here. And these were kind of sneaky. And the way that we didn't hear a lot of marketing around them, but what we've got are these scripts. So let me just zoom back out here. The cursor never wants to click on anything when I'm zoomed in with accessibility. Go in here and we've got all of our pattern directories, but down at the bottom, here's the patterns that I've actually made. So here's our Leaf 2. We'll choose that. Come away from the options. And again, if you traditionally filled this, boom, there's your tiles, all right? Nothing wrong with that. Makes a great Hawaiian shirt, but we'd like something more interesting. So if I go to Edit Fill, there's the leaf again, choose Script, and then we get into some really interesting options. One of the ones that I love is Random Fill. And so when you press OK on this, it brings up a dialog box that lets you play and choose with density, scale, etc. Now, I do find the preview here is very often inaccurate. That's just something that I think we're going to have to hope that improves over time. But I love the fact that we can force randomness into the design. So being able to go in here and choose what your density is, how do you want to vary between small leaves and large leaves? I may need to zoom in here so you can see that a little bit better. But you can see we're getting some very different scales between leaves. You also see there's some color variance in here. So these are all those controls under the random fill. You can do very large leaves, small leaves. Do you want to rotate or you want to keep them all parallel? We definitely don't want that. not in this application at least. Here's our color randomness, brightness randomness, but we press OK. And you see we kind of get this nice random piece that we can add to a background. Now, for those of you that are photographers interested in portrait photography, or when you're doing portrait or studio photography, and you're wishing you could have had one of those Victorian wallpaper backgrounds or a more organic background, I've been using this. For example, I'm sidebar here for photography editing, but I'll use something like this. And maybe I want to add textures and shadows on a wall. I'll use this so that I can make a selection from these elements, right? So if I command click on this layer, that will give me a marquee of all of those elements. And I could use that to make a new layer and fill these random shapes, blur them out. And I can get some pretty interesting effects just for backgrounds in my shoots where I have these things sort of light back here. And that can be really, really fun for breaking up what is a kind of typical boring flat backdrop when you're shooting. So some neat things that you can do with this. But for me, being able to have this organic play is something that, I see a lot of people wanting to have. And traditionally, how would we do that? We would do it with brushes using a jitter feature, right? We would go in here, choose our brush. We would go into brush settings. Let's find maybe a slightly different brush than we would normally have here. Let's just grab something like this. And we have scattering and things like that where we can create some randomness. We can get into our shape dynamics. Space it out here a little bit so you can see it. And this is how we would traditionally try to create this spacing. And again, for people that are less aware of it, this is a lot of fun. Angle jitter, we can rotate things, etc. But the problem with this is that it still only paints with a flat color. Now your brush can have shades in it, but ultimately that's what you're getting, right? And so for me, I love being able to have this random nature fill that we can play with. Now where this starts getting more interesting with the scripts that they've included, let's turn that one off for a second, is that you can also do neat things like pattern on a path, where if I want something to be a little bit more oriented a certain way. Interestingly, we've been able to do this in Adobe Illustrator forever, but they're finally getting it in Photoshop. So I could create a work path with a pen tool, defaults to a shape. So you have to change this setting to actually make sure you're making a work path. Oops, just hit my microphone. Sorry, everybody. But now that I have that path active here, I could go edit, fill, choose that pattern again. And instead of a random fill script, I could say place along a path. Press OK. And you can see here, now you start getting into some of these options that follows the path in an interesting way. If you don't want to alternate, they all face on one side. But I like that randomness, right? So we can do scale progression. Do you want it to descend? So it knows where you started the path and where you end the path. And so you can make it smaller as it goes further along or vice versa. Again, we've got our randomness in here. Angle from the path. And then scaling. So let's make this one kind of tinier. Right. Press OK. And you can see there how that followed, and it gives this illusion of moving off into the distance by receding on the scale as it follows the path. So this can give you some really, really interesting effects if you want to, add something dimensionally to a shot. One thing that I've seen some of the retouchers out of there's a group on Facebook called the Pacific Northwest Retouchers Group, I believe is the name. And they've been doing some interesting things where they've been taking patterns of the edges of people's hair and then drawing a path coming off the hair and getting that to travel away from the person, which I think is a really interesting technique. So this has been sort of fascinating for me to play with, because now I can use this to create these variances into my designs. Let me go turn off that path. And it's just playful and kind of fun. So I'll pause there for a second because I know I'm going a little bit fast. Myra, anything come up there?
Everyone is in awe.
Okay.
So, and asking about the recording because they'd like to be able to see it again.
Okay, good. Yeah, I know I'm going super fast, and I apologize. It's a bit of my nature.
It's all good. Super cool.
Mark, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Oh, that's weird. It muted me on its own. Strange.
You might have tapped the space bar or something.
Oh, maybe that's what I did.
And I'm going to post this on I'll post the recording on the YouTube channel. That's okay with you, right, Mark?
Totally fine.
Okay, good. Yeah, and then I'll let everybody know when it's up.
Awesome. Okay, so in this little preview of kind of one of the techniques I'll be showing at Max. Again, here's kind of the sample, right? Getting into this interesting coloring in here. So you can see this is a random pattern that I generated. And what I did for that is I ran it multiple times and then just stacked the layers, some in front and some behind. So that gives us that little, oh, these are my highlights in the eyeballs. I swear there's more down here. There it is. Right, and that gives us that ability to sort of create a little dimension in the piece here. But getting this coloring is kind of an interesting thing. So rather than, painstakingly kind of targeting areas, selecting them, or some people might think, oh, you're going in here and you're painting with a particular color and you're using a blend mode. And, that's sort of getting into maybe some more advanced techniques, but that's not actually how we're doing it. So the way that we're doing this is actually with a gradient map. And so the first thing that needs to sort of be known here is what is a gradient map actually doing. So let's create one real quick. I'm going to go down to our image adjustment options here to create an adjustment layer. I like to call this the half-dipped cookie button for obvious reasons right there. Also, we were talking about food, so I can't stop thinking about cookies. But I'm going to go choose gradient map here. Okay, and then this is my default gradient map that pops up. But what we can do when you see the properties of the gradient map, so here's that layer that was created. And then up here, we've got the pull down where you have all of these like amazing libraries of gradient maps that Adobe has provided. I'm particularly a big fan of this iridescent one. It's got some really cool hues in here. Now, where this gets really interesting is when you start editing how this maps. So let's kind of see what's going on here. Instead of thinking this as thinking of this as a gradient, which is really not the right way to think of this. The better way to think about this is actually a tone map. Okay, so what you're seeing right now is in this gradient, the low end of the gradient is anything that's in the dark frequency of this picture is going to adopt the color we put into the gradient at that end of the image. So shadows are going to pick up what's at this end, highlights are going to pick up whatever's at this end. And so that's why this looks like a normal black and white image right now. But if instead of the pull down menu, if I click on the gradient swatch itself, this brings up our gradient editor. So if I wanted to create like a negative image, and by the way, for photographers on the call, this is a great way to make black and white photos rather than the traditional, let me desat or grayscale or use image adjustments black and white. This is awesome because you can see it's actually tone mapping. Even though I didn't have a pure black in the image, it has now applied a pure black to the lowest end of the image, which means you could go in here and click and add points. And you could say, oh, I want to do, maybe like a sepia tone only in the mid frequencies. So I get a little warmth. And now that blends between the shadows and highlights and wherever I want to apply that hue. So again, you can do some sort of interesting things there with toning. But just to make sure everyone's understanding how that mapping works, if I flip these two sliders, what I'm now telling it is that I want white to be used in all of the dark frequencies and I want black to be used in all of the bright frequencies. So just like levels or curves, left to right, this is a tone map. So let's sparse this out here. Let's move this across. Now, the way that I get that coloring in the illustration style, and I'm not going to cover the illustration style tonight, I'm going to save that for Adobe Max. So you have to come to my Adobe Max session if you want to learn how to do this cartoon style in a few clicks. But let's say we go in here and we pick maybe like a dark blue for our low frequencies, right? So picking that blue means that is now the darkest value that can exist in that image because I have it all the way to the left. Maybe I go in here on the right and I pick a warm, bright color. So we'll do like kind of a yellow again, right? Now, interestingly, if you want to be able to retain the whites of the eyes, the highlights that were pure white, I just need to move this in a little bit and add a point and then fill that one with white. And you can see there the mapping says, and this little bit of a bright spectrum of the image spectrum, right? As if it was a histogram. I know that there are some shades in the image that were the brightest shades. Therefore, you want me to apply this value. And that's why I'm still managing to keep the white eyes and the white teeth. If I wanted to blend to the other areas more, I could drag this across to the middle area. That would retone this. So just making these slide adjustments really gets you into what we used to think of doing with curves, but in a way more tone specific mapping way. Video editors have been doing this for like 15 years. They've been doing it in After Effects and Premiere this way forever, and they called it color lookup tables, but we do it here with a gradient map. So I could go in and inject some more colors if I wanted to. I could say, hey, that's kind of the lower end of the tonal spectrum. Let me go in here and maybe choose something that's not quite that royal blue. Maybe I get a little bit more into some purples and magentas, my homage to Melissa there, right? We get some of these going. And so you can start applying these colors into that gradient and then moving it off to blend and knock it out. So now I'm getting some of those purple tones in the shadows. I'm getting that royal blue in the darkest end, and this is all getting applied. So now we've sort of played with these patterns and gradient map to get what is sort of a duotone, tritone effect. But what's cool about that is once I like this look, any image that I have, I could simply copy this layer, right? So I have it targeted, I'll hit copy. We could go somewhere else. Now I've got a gradient map at the top of this one. Let me close it. There's what the design looks like without that. Not very appealing. Hit paste. Now I bring in that gradient map from the other project. And so just as quickly, I can retone by using those layers. This is a great way for workflow. So my team, we actually have a Photoshop file that doesn't have any images in it. It just has layers of gradient maps that we keep as a file in libraries. And then that way we can place it and turn layers on and off to apply the image adjustment to our file. So this is another one of those ways that you can speed up your workflow when you're working with teams and collaborating. Now, the last one that I'll show in here, I'm going to jump around a little bit, my apologies. The last one I'll show in here, though, is, don't limit yourself to, just those kind of scripts and these sort of objects. One abstract one that I've been playing with, I'll go to Edit, Fill with Pattern again. Now my gradient map's already in place. Instead of place along path, look at some of these other really interesting ones like spiral, right? Spiral is really neat, but instead of the leaf, and I know this is going to be really hard to see. I'm going to zoom in though. Do you guys see I've got this little stripe here between a black and white stripe? Now I'm nervous about this because usually when I do these basic couple of pixel pattern tiles, it's been crashing the latest build of Photoshop. So everyone, fingers crossed for this one. But if I choose that and we do a spiral, let's hit OK. Pray for the best. Oh, cool. I can get this really cool kind of mosaic. Oh, are you guys not seeing when I zoom in Zoom? No.
If you control zooming on the Mac, no, it's not happening.
Oh, my apologies, everybody. I was using the accessibility feature. that normally I use to zoom in and show parts of the UI. So if I do the quick key here and I go to this slider, you guys don't see that zoomed in right now?
No, we don't.
No.
I'm so sorry. I thought you guys were getting to see when I was zooming in. All right, apologies.
We have a good imagination. Don't worry.
I love it. I love it. All right, that's and again, ironic that you can't zoom and zoom. All right, well, hopefully it's still making sense. So this is one of those ones that I really like if I wanted to create like a retro background or anything else, where I can take a basic form like this and just use it to make spirals and twirls in a pattern sense. So one of the trends we see a lot in design in the last like year and a half is people are doing lots of real crazy abstraction with typography. So you could imagine making a tile out of a word if your brand campaign was built around it, and this thing being spun around and doing some interesting things there. So I'll press OK here. It's going to think. I'm really going to pray that it works. It's a lot of data to process. There we go. So getting kind of a really cool geometry. And the cool thing about this is you can see it's receding the tile down to that smaller scale. So using this versus twirl or spherize and filters, I don't end up with any diffused edges or interpolation in the original image pixels. What I get here is that repeat as a pattern. So you're not seeing any sort of destruction of the elements when you create these forms. So this is another one of those ways that you can play and just get a really cool visual effect. All right, let's jump into something else real quick, as long as everybody's good with that one so far. All right, let's move on here. We haven't done much in Illustrator yet, so let's jump over to Illustrator real quick. I know there's at least a few Illustrator users on the call. All right, so here's another one of these workflow pieces. I've shown this in a few areas before, but I always think it bears repeating until I start seeing it adopted everywhere. So here's a basic icon library, right? I will Illustrator zoom in this time to make sure everybody sees it. Okay, so in Illustrator, I think most of us are aware of that an object has, you know, a stroke and a fill. So if I play with my unicorn here and we look over here in the tool strip, we can see I've got no fill, I've got a black stroke. More importantly, if I go over to properties, I already have the appearance panel up, but just to double down here, you can see we've got that 1 point stroke weight. We can see we've got our color here, it's the black, but nothing else is being added. I always feel like that's a magician moment, and there's nothing else up my sleeve. So, you know, traditionally, why would you use appearance properties? Well, it's pretty fast for me to go in here and say, hey, I want to change the stroke of the unicorn to blue. And so I'll do that, right? Now, this is a shared icon library that my team and I use. And right now I am breaking it. I'm guessing that you can't see it, but let's do a yellow. Oh, that's obnoxious. You can't see that at all. All right, let's pick red. That'll stand out more. So you can see I've got different stroke colors, but you may also see up here on the top that there's a little cloud icon. And the reason for that is when I saved this, if I was to go save as, it'll ask me, do you want to save on your computer or to your cloud documents? And so if I choose to save to cloud documents, it actually puts it up into my CreativeCloud account. And then I share parts of my CreativeCloud library with my team. So they then have access to this. So if I send a message to a member of my team and say, hey, did you add X icon here? Then they know to go to this file and start building it out. So there's a few things we're going to talk about in this file for collaboration, design agencies, working in teams, but let's talk about the appearance thing first. So I have kind of screwed up this unicorn icon now. I've messed with its colors, done a whole bunch of things. This happens a lot with the team. They get lazy. They're editing one thing at a time. They're like, oh, I need these to be a green color. And they go in here and they make it green. And then they export this icon and they get a green version of their icon. And then they leave this thing open. And the next time it auto saves, we all get to see this with green, which screws us all up. Someone's got to clean up their mess. So how do we get around that? We use appearance properties, but what we do is we do forced appearance properties through layers. So I'm going to show you what I mean here. You saw there that you can select an object. I just want to make sure people understand appearance properties, so I'm doubling down on this. If I was to select this, even though it has a black stroke, this is a grouped object, which means I could go in here now, and this little button down on the bottom left says add a new stroke. So I'm not replacing the black stroke. It's going to stay there, but the black stroke exists. If I double click in, it's within the group. Let's close out of the group. But if I select the grouped object, I can say, hey, I want to add a stroke to it, and I want to choose, some other color, like we'll do green again. And so the black appearance property is there within the group, but the green is on top of it. Okay, well, what I want to do is sort of supersede all of this because the icon library is always growing. So what we do is we go into our layers panel, and you can see I have one layer right now. And this is a very important order to this technique. So for those that may or may not know, there's a little circle next to your layer. When you click on that, it selects everything on that layer. Okay, so we can see our bounding box, my objects are selected. I'm going to deselect, click off of it. What I'm going to do is create a new layer first, which has nothing on it. And I'm going to click that button. Now watch the appearance panel here. When I click that button, it gives you the appearance properties for the layer, not the object, right? Which means I can say, I want you to add a stroke to that layer, but the layer has nothing on it, nothing exists. So what I can do is go in here and say, yep, I want to add a stroke and I want everything to be orange. And I want a slightly thicker weight, like 1.5, okay? Well, now that layer has an appearance property on it versus the object, which means if I was to select all of the objects or the icons on the live layer, again, I can click that button, they're all selected, which means if I take that little dot and move it up, they all become orange and thicker. I can now export all of those and get that appearance. And if I drag this back down, they all go back to normal and don't retain that appearance property. So this means if you have an icon library or any kind of appearance property, maybe it's for type, maybe it's for your illustrations, maybe you've got a diagrams file that has particular dash lines or arrowheads, whatever. This means you could do your drawings and have your art on one layer. And then when you very quickly want to move it to a different appearance, you simply, I could just select these three here, drag them up using that little node, and their appearance property changes. And so I could have a layer that's called orange thick. I could have one that's called drop shadow. I could have one that has sketch style. Maybe I'm using a sketch brush. And just by moving things up and down through the layers, they change their appearance properties. So where does this, this helps keep the house clean, right? Does it change the look in the other files? It does, Anne-Marie, if you're linking to this from your library. So for example, if someone placed this in InDesign, it would totally change that appearance. You're spot on. What we use this for is sort of, depending the project we're working on, we leave all of these appearance property layers. So you'll see I have one called live, then I'll call this one orange stroke. So this means that anything that exists on that layer, I can just move it up and down and change it. So for housekeeping, we always put everything back on the live layer, theoretically. I wish I could say my team does that every time, but at least it's easy enough when I open the file, I can move it down. The other, to your point, if it's linked in someone else's layout file and their icons randomly turn to orange, we know someone didn't actually clean up the house when they were done with the project. And then they owe us all lunch. But where this really gets interesting is speed. So if I wanted to be able to generate files for my web designer, my app developer, etc., I need to be able to export these out because these are all icon files on their own artboards. And this is a different way of working as well. Historically, we've seen one artboard and we put all of our icons nice and neatly on a row on that artboard, right? But here, what we did is we made a new file and we said, all right, I want an artboard that is, I'm just making this up now, 3 inches by 3 inches. And how many artboards do you want? And I could say, I want 9, right? And I hit create, could choose my modes, etc. Hit create. And I get a file like this. This is my working area. And I start building my icons into each of these artboards. The reason for that is when we get into the export controls. So rather than worry about grouping or saving out or copy and paste to save, etc., we now can say, oh, I need an orange icon set for such and such presentation. Okay, cool. I go in here, select everything, move this up to the orange layer. It all gets converted. I go to File. I come to Export. We can choose Export As. Oops, that's not the one I want. Sorry. Asset Export under Window. Brings my panel up. Now, when you see this, you can see all of the assets here. These are ones that I've exported individually in the past, and it always remembers that. But the one I want to go to is artboards. So here's all of my artboards. They're named. They're relevant to how they would be used. You guys had those icon libraries where you actually put type on underneath each of the icons and you lock that layer so you don't end up that with your export, right? Well, what this allows us to do is get into our asset export. We hit the export panel, and here it reads the same thing, artboards. Boop. There's all of my artboards, all orange. Now I want to select all. There's all of my icons, or I can choose a range. And just like for those of you that have worked in Quark or InDesign, PageMaker, any print dialogue in the past, you could enter in a series of numbers in here, like 5 through 9, right? And you'll notice it automatically checks only those. It knows the sequential page order of your artboards. So I've got those in there. Where do I want to export them? Let's go in here and choose an area. Community event. I'll hit a new folder real quick. Export, choose. And what formats do you want? Well, for my developers, I need SVGs. I need PNGs. Okay, got that in here. And I want them 2x size as a PNG, so all the sizing and stuff will be calculated for me. We go in here and we choose export artboard. Okay, so that's done. Now, if I was to go over to that folder, we have our export. And there you can see there's all of the SVGs and PNGs put in here. So this is a really fast way of working. And then when I go back in, I can say, oh, I need to clean up the house in case this is linked to anything. Select all, move it back down to the bottom, and I'm done with my project, right? So just from a workflow standpoint, this allows us to work very, very quickly. All right, pausing there for a second, check in with everybody.
Yeah, I have a question actually.
Okay.
Okay, so instead of dragging it up to the new layer that you've created, what about Option or Alt dragging if you're on PC to duplicate it? And then that way you just like delete the layer? Is there, I mean, are you not duplicating it for file size or?
Honestly, for us, it's just more out of lack of confusion. So to your point, like I could take this, hold Option and drag up that dot, and that would move a copy to that layer, right? And then I could isolate it. And that's actually what we used to do before we were using artboards, because we would have all the icons on one artboard. And so we would move copies up between for various work streams. But once we started going to this, it very much became treating this almost as if it's an appearance manager, and then the artboards for exporting. But it's a great question. And it's a great detail to point out that you can drag and make the copies. The one issue here now, and maybe this addresses more of the question, is so you can see we've got that orange stroke. The art you had me move a duplicate of is up here. Let me get this panel out of the way. So here's a fun little challenge in this. Let's go to our unicorn. Okay, so I'm on the object, right? I have it selected. I go to the appearance panel and it sees that the stroke is blue, but it's not, it's orange. And if I was to go in here and change the color of that, like change it to red, it's never going to change. Because the hierarchy of appearance properties, layer always supersedes object group, and group always supersedes object item. And so that's the other reason is if we were to move a duplicate up to gain the appearance and someone doesn't know our workflow, this has happened with one of our new designers. They came in, they're like, I had a corrupted file. I was changing the color and it would never change. And then we showed it to them. They thought we were pranking them. And so it wasn't. So that's one of the main reasons. Let's see, I'm just popping over to the chat. How is your team accessing the icon library.ai file? It's a single file that's everyone is using and doing the housekeeping after. Yeah, we all maintain the house, Anne Marie. This is in our Groq Cloud shared directory, and everyone accesses it there. We can also go in and get that added into our library and shared. So let me show that process a little bit in this next example. And I probably need a time check on things, Myra. Let me know if I'm running long. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm good right now.
It's 7:23.
Okay. When are we supposed to go till?
We can go to 7:30 or however
Oh,
long
okay.
after. So yeah.
Okay, cool. I want to make sure I'm not like, telling bedtime stories to everybody.
Someone's at 11 p.m.
Yeah, that person has probably sat through one of my my 3-minute max efforts where I tried to speak in 3 minutes and took 30. All right, so here's another example of kind of that workflow, right? So here's a series of ads, Google display ads that we're working on. So the company that I work at now is called Groq. And so we're doing a bunch of Google display ads. So each of these artboards is the size of the ad we've got to place. Apparently my 10-year-old is going to walk in right now and show me his project. It's very cool, dude.
This is just on just square pieces.
Okay, I'll catch up with you later. All right. So we get into the artboards being those sizes because then we can easily export them when we're done to JPEGs or PNGs. But getting into that sort of shared workflow, I'm going to show another hack here that Adobe says you're not allowed to do. So I need to add a hero shot to these ads, right? And I have one over here already in the directory, but I want to show you guys how I make this and get this across when Adobe says you can't do it. So let's go to that product shot. So here's a product shot. Shot this in the studio, got my raw file, edited my raw file here. You can see if I open that up real quick, here's the raw file. There's my light in the shot. And, we opened this as a smart object in Photoshop, got it masked out here. And now I have this file. What's interesting though, if I go to libraries and I say, I want to add this to my library, right? Try to drag it up. I get an error that says, could not create a library graphic because camera raw files and files with camera raw settings cannot be added to CC libraries. Well, that's a bummer because I want to be able to keep my raw file and all those raw controls and raw edits. And so this is a major bummer. And what this prompts people to do, and I've seen it, is they go, oh, what a bummer. Okay, well, my boss wants me to collaborate versus library. So I guess I need to rasterize this. Don't do that. Smack them on the hand. Don't smack them on the hand. HR will get mad at you. But actually what I do is I just turn off this background layer and I shift click the two together. Shift click the two together and then go to the little plus symbol and you say, add a graphic. And because you highlighted a non-known layer, an invisible layer, it adds it as a PSD. And that PSD file has the raw file in it, which means I can now have my raw file still accessible for my design treatment. which Adobe says you can't do. So, all right, so now let's rename it, right? So this is our Groq node. And, I'll do ISO so I know the difference here. Now, this means that I can, well, first and foremost, let's close this out now. We'll go back over to Illustrator, and here in my library under graphics, there's that file we just added called Groq node ISO. Now it's really fast, this stuff showing up. I will say I do have 2 gigabit per second fiber speed, so this may not be as fast for everybody when you saw that upload, because that's a very high res image. But if I grab this and I drag it from the library in, it means that as I'm laying out my ad, right, let me drag my placement box here. Okay, there's my hero shot. And I would place that on my ad. Now, interestingly, you're seeing all these color boxes pop up as I'm dragging around. One of our template deals is that in the layers, we name what goes where. So background, hero shots, etc. That way we're sort of keeping the house clean here as well. But from a workflow standpoint, I've dragged this in from the library. I've got it placed here. I'm going to hit copy, and I'm actually going to delete it. Now, this doesn't always work. This is a bug. I've reported it to the Illustrator team, but let's hope for the best. I'm going to choose edit, paste on all artboards. There we go. So it pastes on all the artboards, and now all I need to do is go in and make a quick adjustment, size and position for the different aspect ratios. Got my placement. And now those 3 are all speaking to that file inside the CC library, which means if we wanted to do some sort of edit, like, oh, Mark, we want this to be, more of a duotoned image, I could go in here and double click on this, sends me over to my Photoshop file. I could access my raw file that Adobe says I can't access, right? I could go in here and do some color grading or some sharpening, right? Maybe I go in here and fix some of the optics, whatever you want to do, right? Do some detail in here. Let's sharpen the hell out of it, right? Make sure that my white balance is right. So auto, that gets adjusted. Although that was exposure, that was not white balance. Press OK. It's updating within the masked area. Okay, there's the shot. Maybe I add an image adjustment layer like gradient map, like we did earlier. Okay, now this is extreme, but I'm just going to hit save, close that out, so that when we go back to Illustrator, that's all updated. So because I share that library, my team could get notes for the start of the day, and I could say things like, hey, I'm going to place the photo of the node. Can you start masking it out? Can you start getting the colorization going? Hey, can someone else work on the type treatments? So what you're seeing in here is that I also have, instead of graphics, I also have character styles and I have paragraph styles. So if someone wanted to add a piece of text, right? And so we'll say user group. Let's make that bigger so everyone can see it for a second. Now, by default, that's coming in as Myriad, which is a standard default in Illustrator. But I can go to the library and say, look, main brand font. A style in the same name already exists in this document. Incoming style from libraries. Okay, let's use that. Boop. And there it drops it down and updates the font, which gets me my footer style. So instead of me needing to have this embedded in the Illustrator file, which I do have in here as well, I can share that in the library. This gets really handy when you start working with external vendors. Instead of sending them sort of the archaic brand guideline book and, hey, go memorize all of our settings, you use that for QC, we can actually have a brand guideline in the CC library and use that for reference. So that becomes a little bit more universal than work in this template and this template exclusively. All right, I'm going to pause there for a second. Myra, have I heard anybody? Are we doing okay?
Everybody is loving it.
Okay, I want to make sure.
Great tip. Yeah, everybody's enjoying it.
I just want to make sure I'm not
We can all just keep listening.
Melt-
Just keep talking.
melt any brains or hurt anybody. Okay, well, the last thing that I was gonna show, again, we're just sort of going through features, right? But here's a good example of look, everyone I think in this call has had to do damage control on something that was not made correctly. So here's a good example of that. Let's imagine for a second that this box was a product shot, and it turns out that the field of view that this product shot was taken at was not correct, right? The lens should have been lower, should have used a wider angle, you know, whatever the property is. Okay, first disclosure, I am not a 3D guy, right? There are amazing 3D people out there. I am not one of them, but I do understand the principles of 3D. So one of the features that I'm in love with, you know, when we get product shots done and the angle just doesn't quite line up right, or hey, I shot that Groq node and I need to have a Groq card and the angle's slightly off. This saves my butt every time. So I'm on a smart object layer. Again, this gives me access to the original shot, but it means that I don't have to damage the photo when I make this edit. And so I want to adjust the perspective slightly. It's not true 3D, but slightly as if we were shot from a different angle. So this means what I want to do right now is get into our 3D transformer perspective warp, right? So here we go with perspective warp under edit. And I get this weird little cursor that allows you to create what's called quadrants. And so I'm going to click here, I get a grid. And once you click and get this single grid, your job is to try to identify where is the perspective plane in this image. So if anybody's taken a basic art drawing class, they know that receding lines is where the perspective exists, right? So more or less, I'm tracing the perspective contour. Okay, let's bring that one in. Doesn't have to be super precise. Now, if you go again and click again over here, come on, Wacom. You're gonna give me pain, aren't you? Come on. All right, I'm gonna have to click and drag. Normally you can click, but if I click and drag, do you guys see when they get close to each other? It's probably hard to see in the stream, but that bar lights up. The two nearest bars kind of try to magnetize. When you see that, it means you can let go and it guesses the perspective edge. So now I can make an adjustment to this. Go here. And then last but not least, get into our last one here, right? What is our perspective edge? It snaps. And we close this out while that highlights. Make one last adjustment. Okay. Now up in the top here, that was called layout mode for perspective warp. If you switch to warp mode, now these points define the perspective of that object, which means I can drag up on the object. And it's as if I'm reorienting a photo that was taken. And it's understanding that perspective plane. So I bring the bottom up with it. And completely shift the perspective of how this was shot. So we'll just do a couple more adjustments here. Right, I'll press the OK button. And now, if I turn off that smart filter, that was the before angle, and that was the after angle. So this saves me a lot of the time when I get product shots on stock sites that don't quite match the plane or the surface. And I've kind of had to hack that in the past, do an ad hoc like regular transform. But now I can actually see this working the perspective as I reposition it. So that's another one that's worth knowing. And then if you needed to add art to this, historically, we have done something like, right, let's take some text here. If I wanted to put this on this this box, right, we would traditionally, let's say that we wanted it to wrap around an edge. Traditionally, we would rasterize it, we would free transform it, we'd split it in a couple of areas. It's not impossible, but they have added a feature that makes this a lot easier. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to select the text, command click on it, right? Command click on the layer thumbnail, copy it. I could not copy it because I'm not on the layer. Copy. All right. And now I'm going to deselect. So that's now being stored in the clipboard. What this means from here is I can go up to filter. If I had a layer to work on, empty layer, go to filter and come to vanishing point. And this is another one of those 3D-esque areas that allows us to go in and define the plane. You can see there. All right, and then if it will let me, I'm holding the command key and dragging off the handlebar. And this is the trick to this one. If you want to get a true 3D form, you have to hold command and drag off of that middle bar. Now I can go in here and make adjustments. If the grid turns red, it believes that you don't have an accurate perspective. I'll hold command again, or control in Windows. Drag off that edge. Kind of finish this out. And so we've got our perspective plane. Now, what's neat about this is now if I go paste, right, remember we saved that text in the clipboard. If I go paste, you can see I get this thing pasted in the top left corner. It's got little marching ants on it. If I go to move this around now, it snaps to the perspective of the box. So this could wrap around and I don't have to deal with any of that alignment issue traditionally free transforming. So this saves a lot of hassle when I need to add art to packaging, or if I need to add patterns around a building. If I've got product shots that I want to add a particular texture to, I'm finding this saves me a lot of time and a lot of hassle. And so there's a lot of features to play with in here, healing, etc. You can actually do stamping in here in perspective, which is neat. But then that outputs it to its own layer and lines up there. So I think I'll stop there. There's certainly a lot of other things that we could get into there, but that hopefully introduces just some of the ways that I've been changing my workflow with my teams and collaborators, as well as some of those practices that I'm very comfortable with, like traditionally cutting up an object and free transforming it to fit over a box, and learning some of the new tricks for this old dog in the way that I'm working. And if anybody's really into this and they're wondering how far they can push it, just as one example, here's a perspective shot. I won't go too deep into this, but if I bring up the vanishing point, it's not just 3 planes for the vanishing point. In this particular case, I mapped it to the wall, to the sidewalk, down the curb, across the street, up the curb, and on top of the sidewalk. So when you bring this in, you can see it's mapping here. It'll wrap around that curb and the wall across. See there, it's hiding under the curb and then coming over. So don't think of it as like I have to draw a 3D box grid. You can actually map as many of these planes as you want. And that gets very advantageous. So I wanted to show that. All right, now I'll stop. Now I'll stop blabbing.
That was awesome. I love
Yeah,
that.
that was great.